You know, when I think of British Columbia, this is what I think about. These massive trees that we find here on the west coast. These are ancient Douglas firs, and they're very important pieces of property because many of the large firs, particularly in the low valleys like this one, have been cut and logged, and we've lost a lot of them. So some of these places have been set aside as iconic places, and they're like the cathedrals, I guess, of the west coast. These particular ones in this valley have been set aside as cathedral provincial park, MacMillan Park, and the Nature Trust is a big chunk of that, providing it land on the west side. So this is a really key place for me. I think it's one of those places that just, says British Columbia all the way through. So why don't we go back and see what we can see back in the forest, have a look at some of the trees and maybe a little bit about some of the plants that are here. This is one of my favorite places. We need to go over and see them. You have to get up close to see these. These are really special. So follow me over the logs. This is an old creek bed going through here. This in the winter time will be flowing. Lots of water coming down. Look at these. These are incredible. These are ancient Douglas firs. Look at the size of the massive things. Way up there in the canopy is where the green leaves are. There's nothing really growing here. All the life is up there, way up on the top of these trees. These ones are hundreds of years old. They've been around for centuries. But the really remarkable thing about this is that they are just part of a successional stage, that actually the trees that will take over in here will be hemlocks after maybe 6, 8, maybe even 1,000 years. And then it becomes a hemlock forest. So this is just one stage of the forest. So imagine this, that when we lose these trees, you gotta wait another 800 years before all of this becomes the original forest. It's ancient forest. Let's have a look at it up close. Come on up here. This gives you an idea of just the size of these things. Look at the size of this thing. Look, it's massive tree. And the bark is very thick. You can see here, if I get my hand in behind it, that's only a portion of the bark. You can see how deep it is and how thick this is. Very deep. That deep bark protects the tree, so if there's a forest fire in here, the forest around it will burn, but the tree itself will be protected, and that allows it to grow. So probably what happened here was maybe 800 years ago, 600 years ago, something like that, about the time the Magna Carta was signed, there was some sort of a forest fire or something that opened up this forest, and these would have started as little seedlings back then. You know, I can imagine that, like it's 8 centuries ago, and it gets started, and here they are, and it still hasn't finished. The forest still is changing. It's just absolutely remarkable when you think. It just makes us feel so minuscule. You know, our lives are so short compared to these, what they have seen and what they've experienced. It's remarkable. Here's another nurse log just down here in front of us. I want you to look at this one. It's covered in moss, as you can see, and then look at these. These are huckleberries and salal, and they're all growing along the top of the log. There's a little bit of enriched soil here on the top of this that may be a little bit better than the soil down here, and so we're getting these plants growing here. These are all members of the heather family, and they all like very acidic soil. So the salal and the huckleberry, they're all of the heather family, and they can deal with the acid soil that's produced by the log. Where the soil gets a bit richer, we start to get some of the ferns, like this one, the sword fern. And it's called a sword fern because each one of these little things looks like a sword. There's the blade and there's the hasp right there. You can see the little hasp on it. So they look like little swords. And this one is called the sword fern. And here's a whole garden of them. Absolutely remarkable. Just fantastic. And all this is dependent on this forest. These big trees, they're all part of this bigger ecosystem. This moss is one that grows in areas where there's a lot of rainfall. It's a particular species, it's part of the rainforest. You won't find it out in the dry open forest. You have to come to places like this to see it. This is a special one. So this is the Douglas Fir Forest. And in behind here, here's a little hemlock. See this one here? This is quite different than the Douglas fir. It has a different needle shape. And these ones will be the final forest after about 1,000 years. So if we look around at the Douglas fir, you can't find any seedlings of Douglas firs because it's just too wet now with this canopy. It's just covered it over and made it too wet for them to germinate. The only ones that can survive is the hemlock. So it takes 800 years to get to that point. And then the hemlocks are now making a move to take over. What a place.